This video is for children who need perhaps a little extra practice and review in how to tell time, as well as for my students who were absent during our initial lessons. You will need some paper and pencil. This is a digital clock. We write the time in a digital fashion like this. This kind of clock is called an analog clock, and it's important that we learn how to read them. Most analog clocks have just two hands, a short hand and a long hand. This analog clock has a third hand showing seconds. I have an analog clock here on my whiteboard, and I'm showing you the direction that it goes. This is called clockwise. The long hand starts at the 12 and moves around, and that shows an hour has passed. Here you can see it's 2 o'clock. When it makes a full circle, another hour will go by. The short hand is very important because it's the hand we start with when we're telling time. Here, the short hand is pointing to the 6. Here, the short hand is pointing to the 8. Here, the short hand is pointing to the 10. Sometimes the short hand will be between two numbers, and in that case you have to think about when that clock went around clockwise, what did that short hand just pass? In the example I just showed you, it had just passed the 10. We've talked a lot about the short hand. What about the long hand? It's important too. When you're thinking about the long hand, you're going to start at the top of the clock. That always stands for o'clock, and then we count by fives. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, and 60. And you can't see what I'm doing here, but we never write 60 at the end of a time in digital form, so I'm going to cross that out. Instead, we always write those 2 zeros and we pronounce it by saying it's whatever hour, o'clock. Just like 2 zeros represent o'clock, you have to have 2 numbers here, so we're going to put a 0 before the 5. Look at this digital clock. After the 2 dots, you will always see 2 numbers. Now that you have some background, it's time to tell time in 3 easy steps. The first step that we say is start with the short hand. All you have to remember is to look where the short hand is pointing and just write it down. In this case, you would write down 8. The second step is to draw 2 dots. You draw them after the 8, just like this. And finally, the third step is to write the long hand. Look where the long hand is pointing and write it down. In this case, the long hand is pointing straight up to the blue 0 zeros, making it 8 o'clock. That was a pretty fast explanation, so we're going to practice the 3 steps. Start with the short hand, draw 2 dots, and then write the long hand. Again, the first step is to look at the short hand. The short hand points to the 3, so we're going to write the 3 down. The second step is to draw the 2 dots after the 3, just like this. And finally, the third step is to look at the long hand, go all the way up above the numbers where we wrote by 5s, and write 0, 0 in this case. The time for this clock shows 3 o'clock. Let's try another one. Remember the 3 steps. We're going to start with the short hand first. In this case, we're going to look at the short hand, and because it went between 2 numbers, it went past the 6, so we're going to go ahead and write 6 down. Our second step, draw the 2 dots, and then the third step is to look at that long blue hand for the blue numbers on the outside, which are 15. Write them down. In this case, the time is 6:15. 15. Let's try another one. We're going to move the clock around. Are you remembering the 3 steps? The first step is to start with the shorthand, and in this case the shorthand came around and it passed the 8. It's not quite to the 9 yet. So we're going to write down 8. Our second step is to draw those 2 dots. And our third step is to look at that long hand, which is 55. So this time shows 8:55. Now it's your turn to practice. Grab your pencil and paper. You may want to pause this video so that you have more time to look at the clock. Here we go. How did you do? You can stop now and come back to this video to practice more later. If you are feeling good about time and want a challenge, just keep watching. I bet you're wondering what you would do if you didn't have those long hands written in. Here is a clock without the long hand time written in. Let's take a look. We're going to first again use step 1, which is where we start with the shorthand. In this case it's pointing to 2. Write it down. The second step, as you remember, is to draw the 2 dots. Now the third hand, we don't have it written in, so we're going to start at the 12 and count by 5s. 5, 10, 15. Write it down. This clock here says 2:15. Let's try another. Start with the shorthand. The shorthand's between the 4 and the 5, but it just passed the 4. So write down 4. The second step is to draw your 2 dots. Your third step is to count by 5s to the 6, starting with the 12. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30. Write down 30. This clock here shows the time as 4:30. Let's do another one. We're going to start with the shorthand. Remember, the shorthand's between 2 and it just passed the 7. So we're going to write down 7. The second step is to draw the 2 dots, and then the third step is to figure out that longhand. Start at the 12, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55. So we're going to write the time down with a 55. So this clock here is showing the time as 7:55. Want a challenge? Let's try some where you need to find out the longhand. Remember to hit pause so you can think as long as you need. Remember, for the longhand, you start at the 12 and count by 5s. How'd you do? Remember to keep practicing. Practice makes permanent. Thanks for watching.